The attack, we lost 5 people. We were there through the end of the war. We were at Okinawa, at Buckner Bay, the day the war was over. 3 weeks later, our squadron was sent to Nagasaki. We were the first ships into Nagasaki. You can't believe the destruction. We were wandering around, looking around, and these 2 guys came up and said, "What are you guys doing here?" We said, "We're sightseeing." They said, "Get out of here right now, get back on your ships, do not come back here at all." Nobody knew anything about radiation at that time. That was something brand new. After the war, we took our ship back to the States from Japan. One little incident. We were coming back and it was Thanksgiving. And in the Navy, Thanksgiving is the big meal celebration of the year. So we had our big celebration, including cigars after dinner. Great Thanksgiving. During the night, we crossed the 180th meridian. Next morning, we woke up, it was Thanksgiving. We had Thanksgiving all over again. That's just the way it worked. We came back then to Pearl Harbor, San Diego, the Panama Canal. We went up to Guantanamo and refueled, took the ship back into Charleston, South Carolina, decommissioned it, put it up the Charles River, which is fresh water, and that keeps it from rusting. And that's when we put it away. The ship was recommissioned for Korea. That's my story. Okay? Timing all right?
That was great.
Is that okay?
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
In the beginning you mentioned how you wanted to get into the war.
Oh gosh, yes.
Why? Why the
Because
excitement?
everybody was going.
Why is that?
You would have had to have seen the mood of the nation at that time. Everything was devoted to the war effort. Unless you went through that, and I'm sure that Norm and I'm sure that Paul and I know that Faye and Ruth Dean, who's going to be talking, can tell you the same thing. The war was everything. You just lived it.
I'm Norman Ulrich. I was a B-17 bomber pilot in World War II. And that was just an incidental part of my World War II involvement. God had planned my life for a long time, even when I was a little kid. And that's some of the things I'd like to talk about. Starting out, I spent some time in the kitchen with my mother. During the Depression, things were different than they are now. You didn't all this packaged stuff and all these things at the grocery store and all that. You did what you could put together and make and things like that. And my mother was a very professional person. She was a violinist at the Chicago Institute. But the point at which I had little kids growing up, and as she spent time in the kitchen, I decided to work with her. By goodness gracious, she taught me so many things about that. Anyway, I continued on. On the other side of it was, my father was a sign painter. And back then, years ago, signs were not like they are now, where you just reproduce something. You wanted to make 30 signs, you go bonk, 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 and print them all out. Back then, you want 30 signs, and the sign painter would paint all of them. Also, with sign painting, continued things like painting the big things on the side of trucks and store windows and things like that. So as I got into the upper grades of grade school, I got really involved with my father, and one of the things was he'd get something like, they won 30 signs, and he would do the first one, and then from that point on, he'd do all the big lettering, but he had me do the smaller lettering. So it was very interesting working on things like that. So anyway, when I got into high school, that was all critically important to me. And the real thing that I got involved in was art classes in high school. Also, I did all the other things in high school, all the stuff you're required to do, all the technical things and all, but it was interesting to get into art the way I did it. But continued on, as a senior in high school, I graduated in '38. I got a scholarship to an art school that was in Chicago at that time. They called it the Chicago Professional School of Art. And they gave 2 scholarships each year. It was a 2-year school. And that, by 1938, I got one of the scholarships would be continued until 39 and 40. So anyway, that's where I went for the next 2 years. I had an older brother that was in college 2 years ahead of me, and things were going along. He said to me one day, the way things are happening in this country and in the world is I think we're going to be going to war. And I think we should start getting ready to plan to go into the service if we're going to go to war. He said, I'm suggesting that we take flying lessons. I said, okay, goodness gracious, that sounded great. I think there was an air base out in Joliet, and so he and I on a Saturday usually would drive out there and rent a little airplane, and we had guys that would teach us stuff, but we continued on and took flying lessons, and that was sort of interesting also. And then, you know, suddenly we did go to war, and after a while, and so we both enlisted in the Air Force. It was interesting with that also. They had a big program in downtown Chicago, and we went to that, and they said, anybody wants to become an aviation cadet, enlist. So we went up and enlisted, and your brothers enlisted at the same time and everything else, but he ended up in the Southwest Training Command. I ended up in the Northeast Training Command. So it was very interesting. But the Northeast Training Command also included Indiana, things like that. And in pilot training, I did pretty well, except, excuse me, in the 4 phases of pilot training: pre-flight, primary, basic, and advanced. And each primary, basic, and advanced, each plane got a little bit bigger. Now, when I was in basic training, one morning I parked on the runway with my instructor. It was my 5th mission in that particular airplane, and we were having engine trouble. And the tower called down to the instructor and said, Lieutenant, either take off or taxi out of position because there are too many planes jamming up behind you. So my instructor said to me, Cadet Ulrich, I will take off. See, as a cadet in my 5th mission, I should have taken off. Okay, he's going to take off. So we started on the runway, the tower called down to the airplanes behind us, take off, take off, take off. We lifted up off the runway, the airplane behind us lifted off the runway, and our engine cut out. And we sat back down on the runway. Well, the guy coming behind us, it was one that he could do. Flew on through, propeller, slaughtered my instructor. And I was damaged so badly, even in the way we hit and crashed, I ended up with all kinds of head injuries. I had a terrible scar there. It's the reason for the beard is to cover the scar there, down and up the side there, things on my head. I lost 8 teeth. I had fractured pelvis. I had all kinds of damage. It was just awful, awful, awful. But they put me in the hospital, and I was in the hospital for 2 months. And then they sent me home. I lived in Western Springs. They sent me to Western Springs for a month. Then they put me back in pilot training at the same base where the accident had happened. That was interesting also, because when I went back down, they didn't have me stationed with the other aviation cadets. They put me in the hospital. That was my location. So between classes of any kind, I was in the hospital. They could check on me, make sure I was doing all right and all that. Anyway, that